Are this year's Winnipeg Jets absolute frauds? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because new customers right now can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets just got called frauds by, who was it? The Spit and Chicklets podcast, I believe. And it wasn't the podcast themselves calling the Jets frauds. It was an NHLer apparently from a team that is currently in a playoff spot and perhaps in the Western Conference by the comments suggesting the Jets are frauds, which very interesting take, right? We've talked about Winnipeg having some particular weaknesses over the past few weeks, and it's no secret that the Jets at even strength recently haven't been super great, right? No one is shocked by this. We know it. We've talked about it. But to use the fraud word is a pretty strong accusation. And after a weekend of results in which the Jets had two third-period comebacks against both the Carolina Hurricanes and the Buffalo Sabres in back-to-back evenings, you might not want to be using that fraud word much longer. But there are some issues with the team, and we'll talk about that, over the next several minutes, right? But let's start off with these two games, because I think there are some interesting takeaways from each that are worth really diving into, especially with respect to some, let's just say, interesting deployment choices. First game, Carolina, the Jets were already going to have it a little bit tough because they were down Brendan Dillon, and then Gabriel Velarde's upper body injury kept them out as well. And then late, right before the start of the game, Cole Perfetti got healthy scratched, which, you know me, you know how I feel about Perfetti. He's had an up and down past few weeks, but I feel like that maybe wasn't the best message to send, considering like Perfetti, especially on the fourth line with Domestikov, was actually doing pretty good work the past several games. I know that they've changed it again, and Gustafsson is back now. Kupari also took some shifts, but overall, right, I just don't know about that being the takeaway for Bones rather than looking at some of the other lines and wondering why they're struggling to produce. But whatever, it is what it is. A game off for Perfetti isn't going to kill him, and it's not going to kill the team. The loss of Velarde, though, much bigger issue, especially with a power play that's kind of reliant on him down low, because like the second power play unit is actually pretty direct and pretty decent, but the first power play unit, not good without Velarde. Let's be honest. They don't do as much as effectively. But this game was kind of annoying because, you could tell from like the first 20 or so minutes, it was going to be a long night. Carolina outproduced the Jets, outchanced them, and just looked a lot more dangerous on their rushes than Winnipeg did. And before long, the Jets found themselves in a 3-0 hole. Some of the mistakes were from some risky passes, some turnovers, just rough outings for a number of players. And the Jets were kind of in a tough one, especially, you're already chasing the game. You're missing some of your most important players, and you have to figure out a way to claw back into this one. Well, finally, the Jets started doing something that we've been begging for months now, and that was to put Ehlers back on the first line. And what do you know? That sparked a tremendous comeback that saw the Jets not only tie the game in about 7 or 8 minutes, but also end up winning the game a few minutes after. This was a monster third period. The Jets went from 3-0 down to 5-3 leading, a tremendous win, and also a big validation of what we've been saying, which is, look, Ehlers isn't going to solve every single problem with this team. He can't. But the whole reason that you have Ehlers on the top line is because it allows that first line to start to control play more, which opens up a lot of softer matchups and stuff for your bottom lines, right? If your other lines have easier offensive zone starts, more possession time, and more exhausted opponents because they've spent more energy trying to defend the first line, guess what? It makes their job easier. So that's a really critical matchup that you win when you have a good top line that, hey, they're not going to win every single shift, but you know what? They're going to win a heck of a lot more than you saw with Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde. That line got cooked almost every shift. Even when they were scoring, they still got cooked, right? Everyone knew this. It was very obvious. The coaching staff apparently is the only one that has seemingly gone against the evidence. Either that or it's Scheifele. I don't know who is the one necessarily in control of those decisions, whether it's Bones or it's Mark, who's really not agreeing with this, but you got to get away from that because, like, that first line dies when Scheifele is not around. Now, the second game against Buffalo was a little different, I would say, because they actually started off with Connor, Scheifele, Ehlers, and that line was absolutely flying. It was one of the first times in like the past month and a half that the top line actually had a positive expected goal and chance share. And then towards the, I would say like the end of the second period into the third, suddenly Bones again changed it because he put Nemestikov up there and Ehlers back on the second line. And I don't know how you can watch how good that line was playing and split them up. Ehlers was flying. Connor looked a lot more comfortable as a more complementary piece rather than trying to be one of the primary creators. And Scheifele also interlaces really well with the way that Ehlers plays. I don't know if he really dislikes playing with him because he's unpredictable, but no matter what, it seems like they always find each other. So I don't know what that's about. But for me, it was just frustrating because Nemestikov, who had an all right night already, he was doing pretty well alongside Monahan. He's a good player, but he's not the same kind of transition expert and creator that Ehlers is. And I feel like just because they didn't have a point in the first two periods doesn't mean the line was playing poorly. They were actually controlling a lot of the chances. And what do you know? With that top line controlling a lot of the toughest matchups, the other lines, for the most part, beyond the, like, barring the fourth line, were generally eating their minutes really well. So for me, it was just a strange choice. I think it's going to be one of the situations where, because the Jets won and, you know, the game winner came off of a top line shift, people are going to look at that and say, well, Bones was right. And he was kind of right, but I think there's a much bigger reason why the Jets won, and that's because Josh Morrissey went absolute goblin mode in this game. This was probably one of the best games we've ever seen from Morrissey, and I think this, like, if you have like a Norris ballot, right, and you're looking at games that you want to point to for a defender to be a finalist, this was Josh Morrissey's game. He was everywhere, lights out, incredible neutral zone play, constant pressure on puck carriers when there was, the puck was away from him. He was sealing off lanes effectively, and then offensively, he was just an artist. This game for him was one of the best I've ever seen him play. He had a phenomenal game tying goal. Actually, was it the game winner? Right at the end there, I think it was the winner, the 3-2-1 go-ahead that ended up sealing it for the Jets. And, just a tremendous, tremendous performance from him. For me, he probably deserved more than like 5 points on this evening. I only had a couple, but man, Josh was just everywhere. And, clearly one of he was the game tying goal. That was right. But, a multi-point night for him, a great evening, and really an incredible performance at both ends of the ice that I really feel is worth celebrating. The game winner actually came from Morgan Barron after their line got pinned along the walls for a while. Perfetti sort of lofted the puck over a Sabre or two, and one of the Buffalo skaters at Winnipeg's blue line sort of fumbled the puck. Morgan had just a little bit more gas, managed to get up the ice on a breakaway, and scored from a pretty good distance out, a puck that you probably wouldn't expect to be dangerous. Somehow they got it through, and the rest is history. The Jets scored a couple of empty netters, and life is all good. But, man, interesting games and some interesting takeaways, one of which I want to talk about at the end of the episode because I think the whole Ehlers situation and how he's been used is going to be a bit of a talking point for some time going forward. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to focus instead now on the week ahead and what is pivotal for the Jets to get right as they prepare for what could be one of the most transformative trade deadlines the Jets have seen in some time. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. I'm not personally a big basketball fan, but I know a lot of you probably watch it. Maybe you're Raps fans or you root for one of the traditional teams like the Lakers or maybe even the Golden State Warriors or what's left of them at this point. Like I said, I don't follow the sport as much, but when it comes to the playoffs, I always have a good time. I'll track a couple of those games. I follow some of the big stars and see what they're up to, like Jokic and Giannis. I enjoy watching them. But for all of you fans, this is a chance for you to really flex your basketball knowledge. You can bet on everything, including players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So if you think you know the sport well, this is your chance to put your money where your mouth is and win some extra cash. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot because maybe you might hit a half-court bucket. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Hello, friends. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about Winnipeg's week ahead. And, for the Jets, obviously a lot happening here. This is going to be one of the most pivotal weeks for them to get right when it comes to trade deadlines ever. Winnipeg has to really nail this because this season kind of feels like an all or nothing sort of year where the Jets maybe have one of the best chances to win the division, win the President's Trophy, maybe even win a cup. And they're really close in some areas, but a little further away in others. But with one or two acquisitions, it could completely transform the way that this team works. Before we dive into what I really hope they do and what I'm expecting, just wanted to shout out something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, which is now also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app and on YouTube as always. Now, circling back to the Jets, right? Winnipeg is in a good spot. They're, really, they honestly should be leading the conference and division, but, they've got some games in hand and stuff. They're fighting with the Stars right now. All of it's very close. Right now, the Jets are currently in first in the Central thanks to points percentage, so that's nice. And they also have several games in hand, although they did waste one of those with a bad loss against the Stars. So, not ideal there, but, it is what it is. You just have to sort of take it as it comes and, try and earn points in the rest of the games. And so far, Winnipeg seems like it's on a pretty good track. Even if they don't win the President's Trophy, who cares, right? Winnipeg is already one of the top contenders, but they need one or two other pieces to really, for me, solidify their cup favoritism. Because this team, it's close, but I feel like we see continually, suboptimal line choices and stuff where the Jets are kind of winning in spite of some of the coaching decisions. And I think that's been a consistent theme more towards the second half of the season. The first half, when Arneal was around and we didn't have Connor for several weeks, I felt like the line optimization and usage was a lot better. You had Ehlers playing more. You had Velarde with Ehlers and Scheifele, which was good. You just seemingly didn't have as many issues popping up, right? Because the team actually played the way that Bones and Arneal really envisioned it. With Connor coming back, things have changed, and the dynamic of the top six has kind of gotten thrown around a bit. And with the Jets, I think Winnipeg really needs to find somebody that can kind of supplant Appleton, because I feel like at this point, the Jets are pretty set with how they want to do their top six. Whether I think it's the right choice, well, you know how I feel about it, right? The moment we see Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde back together, it's just over. But hopefully that's less of a thing, I hope. The Jets really do need to find like a middle six winger, though, on the right side who can, eat some offensive minutes, because I feel like Appleton is struggling to keep up. And while he had a good game against the Sabres, generally speaking, the last few weeks have not been particularly kind to him. That line in general has sort of been up and down, but I think Appleton has been especially struggling to keep pace with Lowry and Nino, because both of those guys are super smart. They constantly create chances, and they need somebody who can punish the puck a little more effectively. That's why I've really kind of circled in on Mantha from Washington, because I feel like Big Tony would be a huge player that could actually, get pretty good ice time, find himself a really good scoring role alongside Lowry and Nino, and actually kind of be a grindier forechecker with skill. I think that's going to get him more ice time. I think it'll earn him Bones' trust. And that's the kind of stuff that we want to see coming out of the trade deadline. I'd also wouldn't mind like the Jets maybe exploring, if they're not going for Mantha, maybe another veteran winger with some skill. It doesn't have to be the fastest player, although I would prefer somebody who can get up the ice and create transition. I just know that this team probably isn't built to play that style, so I'm not going to like demand that they find another Ehlers kind of skater. They just need to find somebody who can help transition the play effectively and who can create offensive opportunities and also finish on those chances, right? Generally, big, high-level stuff that I think everyone wants out of good players, but I think this year's winger crop is probably one of the better groups that we've had. You've got everyone from Tatar to Nyquist to Sprong if the Red Wings end up not keeping him for some strange reason. I think we all know that they're probably sticking with him, especially competing for a playoff spot. But, you know, I had a whole list over the past couple of weeks of players I was interested in, and I think the Jets really need to solidify that spot. The right-sided defense question for me is tough because on the one hand, I think the Jets really could use a blue liner. On the other hand, I don't really know how they're going to make all of that work with Schmidt also having to get ice time. And, you know, I just, if I had a choice between the two, I'd probably go for the winger because I feel like the blue line unit is going to be serviceable enough, right? I think the Jets would honestly do better trying to find a forward who can contribute more scoring output because Winnipeg's offense is good for the most part, but it's not, you know, the highest scoring outfit out there. They have to rely a lot on really being opportunistic on the chances that they create. And if they're not doing that, then, you know, they're really leaning on Hellebuyck. But the blue line, I mean, unless Neil Pionk suddenly sees a huge demotion in ice time, I don't really know that anyone's going to join this unit and suddenly make it like 1,000 times better. I think you can do just fine with Sandberg and Schmidt as your third pairing. It's not ideal, but it might make the most sense because Pionk is going to keep getting second pairing time, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So, you know, given those constraints, you might as well go for the forward and really make that your push. I don't know if the Jets are going to do that. In fact, I'm kind of wondering if Monahan ends up being their only ad. I would really hate to see that be the case because I feel like the Jets are well positioned to do almost anything that they want. And with Monahan panning out so well, maybe it's time to take another gamble. This Jets team is starting to cook in a couple of curious ways, and I think this is the time for Winnipeg to really go big or go home. They're not going to have many more chances like this where the field is relatively open and perhaps weaker, while this team has a couple of their top-end players performing at levels we've never seen, right? Hellebuyck is playing out of his mind. Josh Morrissey is playing out of his mind. Ehlers still doing really well. Scheifele doing well. Connor has kind of fallen off this year. It is what it is. You sort of just have to accept that for now. But, you know, you've still got plenty of other guys who are doing really well, like Nino and Lowry. So add to that group, make it almost unstoppable, and the rest will probably fall into place. But let me know who your big trade targets are right now. I know we've talked about it several times. Maybe you have a new name that I haven't thought about. Drop them in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, earlier I did mention I wanted to revisit the Ehlers question because I'm starting to think about the long term with Nick, and I got to say I'm not liking some of the thoughts I'm having about his tenure with the Jets. We'll talk about why all of this is going to come to a head at some point and what it means for the offseason after next year, because guess what? Ehlers is going to be out of contract, and the Jets are going to have a very difficult decision to make either before then or, well, after. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But before we talk about that and get into some perhaps grimier details, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at GameTime. When it comes to buying tickets, we all know that, you know, when you're looking for event tickets, whether it's to concerts or sporting events, you often get hit with surprise fees. You sometimes have services that just straight up crash when you're trying to buy tickets because everyone's wanting the same thing. And a lot of times you have to blindly buy tickets. You might not even know what sort of view you're getting. GameTime totally gets it, and they want to make the process as easy and painless as humanly possible. They offer great killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and they even offer you views from your seat when available, which is great, right? Because you don't want to spend like $600 on a once-in-a-lifetime ticket only to find out you're sitting behind a giant pillar. Just ask a few Fenway Park guests how that's gone. I mean, sure, it's kind of a meme, but no one wants to actually miss the game, right? Especially when you're paying that much to go to an event. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with GameTime. They offer great things, again, like killer last-minute deals, a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up a couple of quick thoughts from this game, really from the weekend of games. And this particular issue is one that goes beyond this weekend. It's been something that's kind of popped up on and off, not only just this season, but the past several years. And that's kind of the question of Ehlers, right? Nikolai Ehlers, whether it's through injury or apparently being in the coaching doghouse for almost his whole career, has just never really gotten the chance to be a first liner. Every time he does, he suddenly produces at a level that we don't really see with too many of our stars. The last stretch that he had with with Ehlers, Scheifele, and Velarde, when he was on that line, he basically only got outproduced by like McKinnon and Pettersson and really some of the top superstars, which is crazy to think because then after that, he got booted off the first line in favor of Kyle Connor, and we all know how that's gone. Not great. I say all this because we're starting to get to the point where Ehlers and his agent are exploring next steps for free agency. It's coming up soon. The Jets are going to have a really tough decision to make because, look, Ehlers isn't getting younger, but he also has a skill set that really no one on this team actually has. He's one of our most prominent two-way attacking presences out there. And I don't mean two-way in the sense that he really defends well. I mean that he's like a transition expert, right? He can ferry the puck up and down the ice better than almost any other skater on this team. The only person who can really do it on a consistent basis is maybe like Josh Morrissey. I think he's probably one of our strongest transition experts. And I would say that's more of a recent thing, right? Ehlers has kind of done it for almost his entire career. And when it comes to creation off the Russian stuff, there's really not many better players. This year, it did kind of seem like that was going to take a sidestep thanks to, that hernia he had, but he's apparently recovered from it and he's been back to doing what he does best. Obviously, there have been like some risky passes that he's made and his puck management hasn't always been ideal, but he creates so much more than he typically gives up. And with the Jets offense kind of stagnating at times without him, to me, I just don't understand why Bones has really insisted on putting him away from Scheifele. I don't know if this is like a Scheifele thing or if it's a Bones thing. Either way, it actively hurts the team because the combinations that they usually come up with for the first line end up not really working all that well. And I think for the Jets, it's been a consistent problem where you have a top line talent who gets like third line minutes. And I don't care if he gets as many shifts as everyone else. The fact that you just don't use him more or find other ways to deploy him doesn't really make sense to me. The coach's job is to find the best line combinations and deploy those on a routine basis. And we don't really get that. Rick is very much kind of set in his ways when he has his vision for the team and his roles. And, he doesn't really paint outside the lines on that one, which does lead to really good team defensive structure. But the rest of the in-game tactics and adjustments have kind of gotten really bad. I hate to say it because the team is winning, but I think in a lot of instances, the team has kind of won in spite of some of these decisions. So, yeah, it's not a great situation to be in. And I think longer term, Ehlers is going to look at all of this and say, well, it's probably time for me to take my leave from the team. And maybe that's best for both sides because Ehlers is never really going to get the top line deployments that he deserves unless the coaching staff changes. I feel like he's always going to be undervalued. And honestly, at his stage of his career, he needs to find a team that's going to make the best use of him because he doesn't have many years left of being a top performer like this. He's kind of wasted a lot of his best years in Winnipeg, and it's a shame because the Jets clearly had one of the most talented skaters in the league, and they just never really made the most of it, which is crazy to me. There have been a couple of times where he'll have really good top six deployments, but then it shrinks or goes away for who knows what reason. I can't explain it. It's one of the most confusing things I've ever seen. And the usage of Ehlers is bad enough to where it actively hurts a lot of other parts of the team because Nick can be such an instrumental piece of the offense. That's what I don't really understand. But I mean, it is what it is, right? At this stage, I just think it's probably better if Ehlers heads to another team, and it might have to come through a trade in the offseason. Because like if it gets to a point where we're starting to talk about him, just walking in free agency, the Jets really can't afford to have that happen. They have got to find a solution with him and his agent that gets him to a good destination. Because like you can't lose your best skater for nothing. It's really a shame because I feel like all of the signs and things were in place for us to retain and develop one of our best ever draft picks. And instead, the Jets are continuing to alienate him. And maybe internally it's not as bad as I think it is, but I got to be honest. If I'm any sort of rational person and I'm looking at, the usage and how I've been deployed over the years, the fact that quite honestly, my earnings have probably been impacted because of that, I'm not going to stick around. I would rather go to a team where I can actually get lots of ice time, score lots of points, and probably earn a bigger paycheck. I hate to say it, but like all of that stuff's going to be used against Ehlers, even though it was actually the Jets who limited his ice time and really limited his scoring output. I think people tend to overlook that stuff and perhaps overlook the human side of these things. And obviously relocating for Ehlers is going to be more of a pain. But if you think about the potential benefits for him going somewhere else and becoming a star player there, he might just pack his bags and be ready to go. I'd be curious to know if he's ever submitted a trade request because I feel like behind the scenes, there has to be some level of tension. We've already seen Perfetti express displeasure at how he's been used. How has Ehlers not requested to trade himself? He's been used like a third liner, and sure, he gets paid a decent amount, but he wants to be that guy for the team, and he's not really ever been allowed to. It's crazy because he clearly can be, but for one reason or another, the coaching staff disagrees. So I don't know. All I think is that this is going to come to a head sometime in the next couple of seasons, and it really should never have gotten to this point, but I suspect it'll probably blow up, and it's going to be a huge fiasco, and whoever gets Ehlers in the end is going to really feel like they fleeced the Jets or got a steal in free agency because he is one of our best creators. He's a marvelous player, and I think he can pretty much improve almost any single top six out there. I would imagine that almost every team that has half a brain cell would be dying to add a Nikolai Ehlers to their roster. He's so good. He's so creative. I just really hope that at the end of all of this, the Jets find a way to convince him to stay because if he goes, we just don't have anyone who can replace him. He's too good and too skilled and too creative. And Winnipeg, despite having some really good draft picks, I can't say that any one of them are going to be able to do what Nikolai Ehlers does on a routine basis. So lots of food for thought there. Let me know how you're feeling about the Ehlers situation. Are you happy with the way that he's being used? Are you worried he's going to walk? We'll talk about that in the future and maybe some of your thoughts and responses on another episode. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. Tune in tomorrow for some trade deadline coverage and, of course, more previews of upcoming Winnipeg games as we are rolling on to what should be an explosive trade deadline Friday. But like I said, that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.